Welcome to It's Your Ego, Stupid, a show lovingly intended for millions of spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people like you who may at times be led into ego stupidity, a lesser version of yourself and a lesser version of life. This show will give you a much deeper understanding of what ego is, what it's doing to your life, how it can weaken your human and spiritual wellness, and how you can heal in each of these areas if needed. It's Your Ego, Stupid will heighten your awareness of the intense link between your ego and spirit, your humanity and divinity, and the synergy that can lead to the best version of you and your life. Your host is Dr. Nick Martin, a licensed psychologist who has worked in the clinical, university, school, and private practice settings over the past 40 years, while serving as a therapist, diagnostician, educator, and consultant. Welcome again to It's Your Ego, Stupid. And now your host, Dr. Nick Martin.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Nick Martin, also known by some as Ego Man, due to my intense focus on ego and how it's impacting our lives, both humanly and spiritually. I want to thank you for listening to It's Your Ego, Stupid on OMTimes Radio. And I hope you've had a great week as you go about meeting the many important challenges that we all face, which during today's show will have us looking at how lower ego flexibility contributes to difficulty in coping with life's stressors and stress. These are the inevitable stressors that come with daily life that can often build up over time to become the stress that we experience. Stressors that involve work-related pressure and responsibilities, relationship-related stress involving our spouse or partner, our children, siblings, parents, friends, and coworkers. Financial stressors involving bills and making ends meet, many people having the stress of having to go from one paycheck to the next. Broader social stressors involving what's going on in society. Health-related stressors involving sickness and possibly becoming physically, mentally, or emotionally disabled. Unfortunately, stressors and stress can have a very powerful negative impact on our health, both physical and mental, if we fail to manage them. And that's why I consider it one of the 10 key life areas that we're called on to manage in our life. Research on heart disease, cancer, mental illness, and suicide clearly demonstrate the link stress has to a lower quality of life, our mortality, and failing to live up to a normal life expectancy. Contributing to the management difficulties are ego energy issues involving power, flexibility, or vulnerability that often lead into the mismanagement of stressors and stress, but in different ways for different people, but often making things worse, not better, which I'll be looking at in this and my other programs that are focused specifically on a particular imbalanced ego energy and its impact on stress and the mismanagement of it. Mismanagement that is often unrecognized due to the blinding effect of unhealthy ego energy in seeing what's really happening. Mismanagement that's happening even though the person under stress is an intelligent, spiritual, and mentally stable person. Unfortunately for those with lower ego flexibility, the focus of our program today, they often approach stressors and stress with a very rigid approach to understanding and managing them. Their intense sense of owning the truth often leads to a rigid approach to coping with relationship, work, financial, health, and home-related stressors, which weakens their ability to adapt to the nuances that are often at work, that can often make similarly looking problems actually quite different, and which requires a broader approach to handling them. Unfortunately, despite being smart, spiritual, and mentally stable people, they often fall into the trap of a one-size-fits-all approach, in which the same approaches are used over and over again, even when they're not working. They're not comfortable realizing that they don't have all the answers, and they aren't comfortable reaching out to others to get them. The ownership of truth, which is actually an illusion, is extremely important to them, and they will hold on to it at all costs in their dealings with stressors and stress. Now, before we go more deeply into that focus, I do want to mention that It's Your Ego Stupid is a program for spiritual, intelligent, and imperfect people, just like you and me, who may at times be led by our ego into something I call ego stupidity, a lesser version of ourselves, and a lesser version of life. Ego stupidity, rooted in ego energy, affecting relationships with our family, friends, and coworkers, even ourselves, which could stand some improvement, maybe a lot of improvement. Ego stupidity, rooted in ego energy, impacting our efforts to achieve, to use our potential, to recognize the service in what we are doing, and experiencing a sense of meaning connected to our life's work. Ego stupidity, affecting our ability to do effectively with all of the changes, adversity, stressors, and conflicts taking place in our life, often leading to their managing us rather than our managing them. Ego stupidity, making it difficult to grow our mind with truth, while keeping us stuck in faulty beliefs, values, attitudes, and prejudices, with many acquired nowadays from unfiltered social media, fake news on the internet, and opinion news on TV, masquerading as truth, and often suggesting that truth doesn't matter anymore, helping many to avoid what can be known as inconvenient truths, the kind of things we need to know even though we don't want to know them. Ego stupidity, making it difficult to feel genuine, lasting happiness, while often leading us into unnecessary anxiety, anger, guilt, sadness, or fake happiness, being substituted for the real thing. And finally, ego stupidity, impacting our spiritual wellness and ability to be the love, life, and energy God is in our daily thoughts, words, and deeds. In short, impacting our ability to be our divinity in our daily life. As you can see, there are lots of important places that ego stupidity can make its appearance in our lives, the source of which is the nature of our ego energy. If things aren't going as well as you'd like in any of these areas, you've come to the right place, because a lot of what's going wrong has nothing to do with our intelligence, or the absence of spirituality, or the presence of mental instability, and has a lot more to do with our ego energy, serving as the fuel for ego stupidity. Your lives, relationships, and experiences have taught me all of that over the past 40 years, and what I'm sharing with you in my website, my books, and my shows about ego energy and ego stupidity, and how we can heal it with ego medicine when and where needed. Again, I want to thank you for tuning into It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio. During today's show, we'll be looking at the impact that lower ego flexibility has on the way a person copes, or more accurately, fails to cope, with the stressors and stress that makes its appearance in their life. As a quick review, people with lower ego flexibility are experiencing an impaired ability to adjust and to adapt their thinking, which in the confines of today's focus involves how they think about stressors and stress. They often take a rigid and inflexible approach to them, in which they think about them the way they want to think about them, and not the way they need to think about them. As I said earlier, inconvenient truths are like this. They force us to think about things the way we need to think about them, not the way we want to think about them. People with lower ego flexibility have difficulty updating or upgrading their approach to stressors and stress, even when being confronted with incontrovertible evidence that their approach in thinking about them is wrong. Applying this approach to COVID-19, which is the greatest collective stressor we have faced in our lifetime, touching us in many of the stressor areas such as finances, employment, relationships, and health, these are the people with lower ego flexibility, who had difficulty adapting to its challenges and only seeing it the way they wanted to see it, often locking on to conspiracy theories, despite the incredible amount of death and sickness from COVID-19 that was being shown to them. Despite being intelligent, spiritual, and mentally stable people, they had difficulty seeing their way to fully appreciate the dangers of COVID-19, despite their being incredibly apparent to most of us. I would say that ego stupidity explains a lot of that. This is probably one of the best examples of what I'm saying about ego energy and its powerful impact on our ability to deal with reality. People with lower ego flexibility aren't good at realizing what they don't know, and therefore aren't good at trying to find it. Their unhealthy, imbalanced, lower ego flexibility is leading them to misinformed ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving in response to life's stressors and stress that they are confronting, that is actually allowing it to build up, even though they often don't realize that this is happening. Unfortunately, their body is often having to absorb this stress and resulting in elevated levels of stress hormones over time, which damage the heart muscle and the coronary arteries, leading to increased levels of inflammation and buildup of blockages, the precursors of heart disease, heart attacks, and early death, the leading cause of death. Does any of this sound familiar to you? Well, there are millions of people who experience these difficulties because there are billions of people on the planet, and every one of them has an ego, just like you and me. Some of these people are living in roles such as the authoritarian, the ethnocentrist, and the paranoid person that I talk about in my book, The Two Voices Within. I want you to take a look to see if you or a loved one is experiencing any of the symptoms, ego stupidity, and ego impact on spiritual wellness I'll be talking about today. I want you to diagnose you, because you're the only one living you 24/7. Now we're going to take a look at some of the symptoms that indicate if a lower ego flexibility voice is talking through you in your life when confronted with stresses and stress. So here's the first one. You approach stressors and stress by thinking about them the way you want to think about them, and not the way you need to think about them. Some of the stuff I've said earlier about the difference between wanting to think about things a certain way and needing to think about things a certain way, the difference between faulty belief and truth. People with lower ego flexibility are very closed-minded, and they're locked onto how they want to see things of a financial, health-related, relationship, work-related nature involving stressors and stress. Again, that rigid thinking that I was referring to earlier is at work oftentimes for them. Here are some questions for you to think about in reference to this particular symptom. Do you keep using the same approaches even when they're not working? Again, keep using the same approaches to dealing with the stress in your life, the stressors in your life, even when they're showing themselves not to be working. This is something that lower ego flexibility causes people to do a lot of. Keep trying the same things even when they're not working. Is the idea of asking for help not even on your radar? The idea of helping or asking for help from somebody else is a very difficult thing for people with lower ego flexibility because they often think they own the truth and that nobody else knows a different truth that's better than the one they already know. Is the idea of asking for help unthinkable? The whole notion of reaching out and asking for somebody else is quite difficult because this tight ownership of truth that the lower ego flexibility person wants to believe they own would be violated by asking for help from others. Is it hard for you to realize that there can be a distance between what you think is right and what is really right, meaning truth? Again, this is something that's very difficult for people with lower ego flexibility to wrap their heads around. This understanding that what they think is truth and what may actually be truth, there can be a gap between the two. They often approach this as if there is no gap for them in between the two. So when you think of these questions and the symptom, does any of this sound familiar to you? I'm going to go on to the next symptom. You don't know when to stop listening to yourself when coping with stressors and stress. People with lower ego flexibility have a difficult time turning off their own thinking and ideas in an effort to kind of reach out and to listen to other people. So they don't know when to do that, and they don't think they can do that because that would imply not having ownership of the truth. In this case, truth about how to deal with life's stressors and stress. People with lower ego flexibility only want to pay attention to their own ideas and beliefs in dealing with stress. They're really into just listening to themselves. Here are some questions for you to think about as you get further into this particular symptom. Do you have trouble listening to people and you just hear words? People with lower ego flexibility don't want to take listening or to others at the meaning level, at the listening level, because that means they are opening the door to the possibility that somebody else knows more than they do. And for them, listening to somebody else is like an invitation to the truth that they don't know, and they don't want to allow themselves to believe that. Also, do you tune people out quickly when they are offering suggestions or advice? So when people start to do that, the door closes to your mind. That is, you don't want to hear what other people have to offer because that would be a suggestion that you're opening up to their truth, not your own. And do you really understand what they're saying and why they're saying it? Do you really take the time to really hear and listen? There's a depth to meaning that's involved when you're really paying attention and you're listening and trying to get at an understanding, which is quite difficult for people with lower ego flexibility. So when you think about these questions and the symptom, does any of this sound familiar for you or perhaps somebody you know? I'm going to go on to one more symptom before we go to the first break. You only ask for help from people or resources that reinforce your way of thinking about handling stressors and stress. People with lower ego flexibility are most comfortable being with people who they think share their truth. So they only want to hear more of what they already believe from somebody else that's sharing the same ideas and thoughts, nothing really different. So are you really just asking for confirmation or affirmation or validation of what you're already doing? That's more of what the listening to other people is about. And also, do you have difficulty reaching out to different people with different ideas? Something I'm going to say more about a little later, but this whole notion of checking in with different people is almost a no-no for people with lower ego flexibility. And also, do you laugh at or ridicule those different ideas? An attack upon somebody else's truth rather than being respectful of it. So when you think about these different questions and this particular symptom, does this sound familiar to you for somebody that you do know? We're coming up on our first break. When we return, we'll be taking a look at reflections of ego stupidity connected to lower ego flexibility and issues involving dealing with stressors and stress. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, and I'll see you after the break.
Conscious media for conscious minds. OMTimes. Being a radio host on IOM FM allows you to build your show on a rich platform with the power of the internet to fulfill your outreach goals and connect with a very specialized and global online audience, unlimited by time and distance. OMTimes Radio will provide you with web relevance, a recognizable conscious brand, and with the standard of excellence that has accompanied every single OMTimes endeavor. Host your show with OMTimes Radio Network.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
Hi, Dr. Nick Martin here. I want to invite you to visit my website, egoandspirit.info, where you can find lots of information on ego and download your free ebook copy of It's Your Ego Stupid. Fix it to fix your life. Also, please visit the shop page where you can find each of my other books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, and The Two Voices Within.
COVID-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at reflections of ego stupidity and when it's happening in a lower ego flexibility person's difficulties in dealing with stressors and stress that life will bring to them. Some of these are going to seem odd or strange or weird, funny, inappropriate. But that's probably because you're not living in that energy. But for those with lower ego flexibility, it's often leading them to engage in ego-rooted, non-reality-based, truth-disconnected thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, affecting their ability to cope with stressors and stress due to their low level of ego flexibility. And it can often lead them to conclude that the abnormal things that they're thinking or feeling or doing are normal when confronted with stress and stressors. And like the symptoms, they can become their abnormal normal that they don't realize they're caught up in. But others often can because they're not looking at them through the same ego energy prism or filter or lens that the lower flexibility person is looking through to see what's taking place in dealing with life's stressors and stress. And they are intelligent, spiritual, imperfect, and mentally stable people, but they've gotten caught up in the web of an abnormal world of their own making due to their unhealthy lower ego flexibility energy. And they can stay stuck there until they heal the energy, leading them to the symptoms and ego stupidity that is playing out. They can do this with the use of ego medicine, consisting of, firstly, coming to an understanding of what ego is and isn't. Coming to an understanding that your ego is an energy at work in your life in an effort to promote your survival. But unfortunately, when it becomes imbalanced, it often creates lots of difficulties in different areas of life, as we've been talking about, and in different ways. But also coming to understand that your ego isn't something that possesses an intellect. It doesn't think. It doesn't have a brain to think. It's an energy. And also understanding that your ego isn't an entity that is out to impact your life in any intentional way, shape, or form, because it doesn't have an intellect upon which to form an awareness of who you are or what it is or even what God is, despite some of the things that have been written that are not accurate about what this is, that it's an energy. Also, the second component to ego medicine is to understand your ego energy, to tune into it, to get an understanding of how much volume, as I call it, or of power, how much flexibility, how much vulnerability are operating in your energy. That's the fuel that is entering into your mind, and it's affecting the thoughts that you form, the thinking you form, the feelings, the behaviors that you form. Ego doesn't form them for you. You draw upon the energy in order to do that. And then the third component to ego energy involves replacing ego-rooted, non-reality-based, truth-disconnected thoughts and beliefs that we created. Again, ego doesn't form them, we do. Build upon the energy. And we replace them with those which are connected to truth and reality, both human and divine. And so the next part of our show today deals specifically with the third contributor to ego medicine, which involves looking at reflections of ego stupidity for the disconnection from reality. These are the kinds of inaccurate, illogical, or irrational thoughts that people with lower ego flexibility often bring into their efforts to deal with life's stressors and stress. And here is the first one. I always know the right way to deal with stressors and stress. People with lower flexibility engage in what is a very tight embrace of the truth. And they always think that their thinking is the right thinking, the truthful thinking. To them, there is only one truth, and that is the one they know. And that everyone else who does not possess that same truth is engaging in non-truth. This is the kind of thinking processes that are often in work in the mind of the person who could be the authoritarian, maybe the racist, the sexist, the paranoid person, the ethnocentrist, very rigid ways of looking at things, and ownership of the truth. My way is the right way. And this is ego stupidity that can feed into additional ego stupidity, which also starts to happen. And that includes, I don't need to listen to others when my approaches aren't working. So the person with lower flexibility can be, in using their approaches, they're not working. And instead of doing the reality-based thinking, which is, I need to hear from somebody else, I need to listen to somebody else, it's the opposite. I don't need to listen to anybody else anyway. So this is a reflection of ego stupidity. Also, another thought, people wouldn't have better ideas about what to do than I have. Again, there's this absolute truth thought process going on in the mind of people with lower ego flexibility that precludes them from thinking that somebody else might have a better idea or suggestion about what to do. Another non-reality based thought, I can't ask for help. Asking for help in the form of getting more information, maybe more truth about how to handle stress or stressors is something that they tell themselves they can't do, but it's a non-reality based thought because we can do that. But the energy is stopping them from doing that or leading them in the direction of forming that thought. And also, another thought, I don't need to listen to others' approaches when they are working. So this is a situation where somebody's doing something else and it's different and it's working, and they are telling themselves, but I don't need to do that. I don't need to listen to them tell me about doing that. Again, another non-reality based thought. When your lower ego flexibility is healing, you begin to realize that you're not right all of the time and that nobody else is. And that we can each serve as our brothers and sisters keepers by sharing the things that we've learned about life. But until then, when you're thinking that you always know the right way to deal with stressors and stress, well, that's your ego making you stupid. Here is the next reflection of ego stupidity. I shouldn't listen to other people's advice or suggestions, particularly if they are different from mine. I shouldn't listen to other people's advice or suggestions, particularly if they are different from mine. People with lower ego flexibility treat differentness as if it were kryptonite, something they keep their distance from, including the ideas, connected to stressors and stress. So anything that is different isn't acceptable to them. And this is ego stupidity that can feed into additional ego stupidity that often begins to happen, which includes that different ideas and approaches in coping with stress are deficient. This whole idea of doing something different, anything that's different is deficient. These are the type of people who wouldn't have anything to do with alternative medicines that have come forward, that have shown us ways beyond traditional medicine that we should be looking at. Also, thinking outside of the box or brainstorming is crazy. This whole idea of looking elsewhere to checking into new or different ideas is something that's very, very difficult for them to allow themselves to do, because it goes outside of the truth they know or want to know. And also, another thought is I shouldn't listen to people with different backgrounds from my own. These people with lower ego flexibility have a difficult time listening in particular to people with different social backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, racial backgrounds. They just can't get past the differentness equals deficiency thing in many cases. When your lower ego flexibility is healing, you realize that the differentness of other people's ideas can be more effective in handling life's stressors than the sameness of my own. But until then, when you're thinking that you shouldn't listen to other people's advice or suggestions if they happen to be different from you in all of the rest, well, that's your ego making you stupid. One more reflection of ego stupidity: the old, tried and true ways will always work. These are people with lower ego flexibility are locked onto the familiar and traditional approaches to handling stressors and stress, the tried and true. And this feeds into additional ego stupidity, including, I don't need to learn anything new, different, or better than what I already know. Again, it's that energy that's keeping them stuck in where they want to be stuck. And they also think that I can only make things worse by trying something different. So their hesitancy about working with something different is there, and it can only make things worse, which isn't always the case. It can make things better. And one more thought: it's working even when it's not working. How crazy does that sound? Their effort to do something is not working, but they keep telling themselves that it is working. When your lower ego flexibility is healing, you begin to realize that there's a balance to be struck between using older and familiar approaches and those which are newer and different. But until then, when you're thinking that the old tried and true ways will always work and all the rest that I share with you, that's your ego making you stupid. Now I want to share some specific ego insights connected to the symptoms and ego stupidity that I've been talking about. These are insights that can help you to better see what's going on behind the scenes and beneath the surface when it comes to difficulty in dealing with stressors and stress for those experiencing lower ego flexibility. These are insights intended to help you see more of your ego blindness and what ego is actually doing when it comes to difficulties. And here's the first one. Your lower ego flexibility voice, which is really the infiltration of your mind with your lower ego flexibility energy, is keeping you locked onto only your ideas and thoughts and beliefs in how to deal with life's stressors and stress. It's that energy that's keeping you stuck wherever you're at. And it's leading you into a narrow understanding of truth, which can only exist inside of you, never outside. And it's leading you to think that all that is outside of you that is not the same as being non-truth. And it's leading you to fail to recognize that you can be carrying around mistruth or non-truth. A very important awareness that sometimes our mind needs to be upgraded, needs to be updated with newer information that can help us develop a higher quality of our mind connected more deeply to truth. When you awaken or are more conscious of your lower ego flexibility, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. The next insight, your lower ego flexibility voice, that infiltration of your mind with lower ego flexibility energy, is preventing you from getting an appreciation of what you don't know and your ability to seek it. It's blocking you from knowing what you don't know or seeking it. It's blocking you from experiencing a healthy respect for what you may not know in dealing with stressors and stress in particular. It's sort of a wall that's up against letting you open the door to the possibility that there are other things for you to learn from within yourself or others. And it's blocking you from communicating a healthy humility to others by reaching out. So it's almost an arrogance, that says, I don't need to listen to anybody else. They can't really teach me anything more about what I need to know. And that's what's taking place when you are caught up in this kind of energy. And it often is leading you to overestimate what you do know. Again, you're overestimating it. You're getting caught up in thinking, overestimation in the form of I know the truth and nothing else but the truth, and others don't. And it's also leading you to underestimate what you don't know. To underestimate what you don't know. There's often times when people have this very low ego flexibility energy at work, there is a lot that they don't know, that they don't realize they don't know. As an example, Archie Bunker, there was a lot he didn't know and that he didn't realize he didn't know. So when you awaken or are more conscious of your lower ego flexibility, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. I'm going to go on to one more insight. Your lower ego flexibility voice, that infiltration of your mind with your lower ego flexibility energy, is preventing you from fully realizing when the failed approaches you're using aren't working. I think I spoke about this earlier. It's this business of failing to realize when things aren't working. You're just stuck on using the same faulty truth, thinking that it is genuine truth or absolute truth. It's preventing you from seeing the errors and mistakes that you're making in dealing with truth or dealing with stress. You're really failing to see that what's not working very well, and you keep staying stuck on what's not working rather than moving on to finding out more about what else could work from within yourself or from others. It's leading to your doubling down. Maybe you've heard enough about that word in your effort to prove you're right and that you know the truth. This idea of doubling down. This happens when people are wrong but don't want to know they're wrong. So they double down. They keep sticking with what they already know rather than opening up to something else. And it's preventing you from looking to others with different approaches. As I said earlier, this whole notion of reaching out, getting help from other people in your efforts to deal with stress and stress is quite difficult for those with lower ego flexibility. It's an acknowledgement that I don't know or own the truth. Very difficult for those with lower ego flexibility to be able to do. When you awaken and are more conscious of your lower ego flexibility, you'll be able to see and realize all of this. We're coming up on our second break. When we return, we'll be looking at ego's impact on our spiritual wellness. This is Dr. Nick. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio. And I'll see you after the break.
The Real Conscious Connection. OMTimes Radio. IOM FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
If I could be you,
and you could be me,
for just 1 hour.
If you could find a way
to get inside
each other's mind.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
We've all felt left out. And for some, that feeling lasts more than a moment. We can change that. Learn how at belongingbeginswithus.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Walk a mile in my shoes.
Welcome back. You're listening to It's Your Ego Stupid on OMTimes Radio, a show for intelligent, spiritual, and imperfect people, just like you and me. Now we're going to take a look at how lower ego flexibility can impact our spiritual wellness when it comes to coping with stressors and stress. We're going to be looking at ego's impact on the connection to the divinity within our humanity, the disconnection that is taking place between our humanity and our divinity, getting them to be further and further apart. The God within each of our being, which is one of the 4 divine gifts that we've all been given, the gift of God within. The lessening of our spiritual wellness involves gaining distance from being the love, the life, and the energy God is within our thoughts, words, and deeds, when ego is getting in the way of working with the stressors and stress taking place in our life. Each of these can be undermining our spiritual wellness by distancing us from God, the God within us, our divinity. And here are some examples of ego's impact on spiritual wellness for those with lower ego flexibility who are failing to be their divinity when stressors and stress have gotten the better of them, even when they don't realize it. So we'll get started with ego's impact on being the love God is when dealing with stressors and stress. People with lower ego flexibility have difficulty being spiritually well when rigid and inflexible thinking weakens their efforts to manage stressors and stress with unconditional, connective, unburdened, and unlimited love. Your divinity involves opening your mind to all that is available within yourself and others in order to healthily manage the stressors and stress taking place in your life. When your lower flexibility and rigidity restricts you from lovingly working with the stressors and stress you face through openness to greater truth, you're not able to be the unconditional love God is in managing these important life challenges. We must bring unconditional love and an awareness of the potential to grow one's mind from within and from others to the management of life's stressors in order to manage them in greater truth. When your lower ego flexibility and rigidity leads you to confronting life stressors and stress with distance from greater truth and love, you're not able to be the connective love God is. We must be lovingly connected to truth about life stressors and stress, particularly the truth we need to know, so that we can allow the healing force of love and truth to work in our dealings with life's stressors. When your lower ego flexibility and rigid thinking are burdening you with the absence of love towards learning the greater truth that resides within your mind and others in working with life's stressors and stress, you're not able to be the unburdened love God is. We must manage them with weightless and freely flowing love so that we can be brought to greater truth in order to learn about, manage, and heal them. When your lower ego flexibility and rigidity are limiting the amount of love that you can bring to working with life's stressors and stress, you're not able to be the unlimited love God is. The embrace of them with unlimited and expanding love will open the door to learning everything which is unknown from within and from others in order to manage and heal the stressors and stress we must face. When ego is getting in the way and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity. Next, we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about ego's impact on being the life God is when coping with life's stressors and stress. People with lower ego flexibility have difficulty being spiritually well when a lack of recognition of their distance from seeking and knowing truth is leading them to dishonor and disrespect the opportunities to learn more of what is needed to cope with life's stressors and stress. Your divinity involves honoring and respecting all sources and resources to knowing truth that are available to you in coping with life's stressors and stress. When your lower ego flexibility and rigidity are leading you to dishonor and disrespect the ignorance and limitations you are bringing to your dealings with stressors and stress, you're not being the life God is. The recognition of our ignorance and limitations will teach us to honor and respect the opportunities to learn what must be learned from ourselves and others in our dealings with life's stressors. When your lower ego flexibility and rigid thinking is leading you to dishonor and disrespect what others may offer to you due to their being different in appearance and background, you're not being the life God is. The recognition of equality and worthiness that all share will allow us to honor and respect all persons' ideas, even those which we may not agree with, in our efforts to cope with life's stressors and stress. When your lower ego flexibility and rigid thinking is leading you to dishonor and disrespect the nuances and complexities of life's stressors and stress, but by insisting that they're all alike, you're not being the life God is. The recognition of life's complexities will allow us to honor and respect these differences in their efforts to cope with one's stressors and stress. When ego is getting in the way, and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity, in which any stressor and stress can be managed and healed. Last, we're going to take a look at being the energy God is and ego's impact on it when coping with life's stress. This involves being able to access healing and transformative energy designed into your being to naturally occur when you're connected to human and divine truth. This is a capacity that's 3 million years in the making, just as all of the other wondrous things that we have been endowed with due to the wisdom of the ages and evolution. A capacity rooted in our common source, be it known by you as God, Allah, Yahweh, Vishnu, Great Spirit, Source, or another that I failed to mention. People with lower ego flexibility have difficulty being spiritually well when failing to manage life's stressors and stress within the light of truth and understanding that can be found when they are not being blinded by thinking rigidly in their efforts to cope with life's stressors and stress. Our divinity involves healing and transformation in which we are willing to work with and manage life's stress by seeking the truth and understanding that can be found when it is not being obscured by the illusion of possessing an infallible mind in which one knows all truth. It involves healing and transformation in which we are taking responsibility for seeking truth and understanding about our life's stressors and stress that's no longer hidden by faulty notions of being the owner of the truth about them. When lower ego flexibility and rigid thinking is keeping you from knowing truth and understanding about life's stressors, you're not being the energy God is in working with them. The awareness of one's inflexible mind and the distance it creates from truth about life's stressors and stress will open the door to deeper truth and understanding and the ability to meet them within the brilliance of human and divine truth. When lower ego flexibility and rigid thinking is keeping you from knowing truth and understanding about the potential of others to help in managing life's stressors and stress, you're not being the energy God is. The increasing awareness of how others can be helpful to us in coping with life's stress will open the door to a deeper truth and understanding of the brilliance of human and divine truth available to us in managing and healing life's stressors when all sources are sought. When lower ego flexibility and a rigid mind is keeping you from knowing truth and understanding about the older or old, outdated, and limited ways you are using to cope with your stress, you're not being the energy God is. The increasing of awareness of the limitations of one's thoughts will open the door to a deeper truth and understanding of what one does not know and will need to learn in managing stressors and stress that life will bring to our door. When ego is getting in the way and all of this is happening, you're gaining distance from your spirituality, are less spiritually well, and failing to be your divinity. As we leave our focus on ego's impact on our spiritual wellness, when lower flexibility is at work in coping with stress, please know that we often make God and our connection to God and others so much harder than it has to be. This is what happens when unhealthy ego energy is getting in between us. God and life and we become so much better and so much easier when we remove that obstacle with ego medicine. As we leave our focus on lower ego flexibility and difficulty coping with life's stressors and stress, give some thought to the symptoms, ego stupidity, insights, and spiritual impact I've shared with you. I hope what I have shared with you today will serve as a dose of ego medicine, and if any of it resonates with you, please help me to share it with others. I want to mention before leaving that you can purchase each of my books, Ego Therapy, Ego Spiritualism, The Two Voices Within, and It's Your Ego Stupid, at the online bookstores for Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Balboa Press. You can also purchase focused ego meditations on the shop page of my website, egoandspirit.info, which can help you to know when you are truly speaking with your voice in your life and not ego's, as you go about healing your ego energy where needed in its flexibility, power, and vulnerability. I end today's show with this message. The great news is that working to heal your ego energy using ego medicine by growing your awareness of its symptoms, ego stupidity, insights, and spiritual impact will allow the divine truth in your being to flow and to shine through you and allow you to fully embrace each of the divine gifts. The spiritual part of healing is a given. It's part of your endowment. Divine truth and the divine gifts are part of your heritage that already exists within you. You need do nothing more to be spiritual. You already are. You are a spiritual being having a human experience. You only need to enhance your humanity with ego medicine so that all which is available to you is given. Fix your ego to fix your life, humanly and spiritually. I want to thank you for listening and allowing me to be your servant. Please have a great week, and do come back to my next program. In peace and love, this is Dr. Nick saying goodbye for now.